The sound of sobbing echoed across the deserted train platform as the last rays of the October sun disappeared behind the distant mountains. Deanna Bennett clutched her tattered valise, her tears falling onto the cold wooden steps of Cottonwood Station. Her gloved hands trembled, whether from the biting chill of the Wyoming evening or from despair. She couldn't tell any more. The train that had brought her to this forsaken outpost had departed hours ago, taking with it her last connection to civilization and her last hope. Deanna had arrived in Cottonwood with dreams as vast as the western sky, only to find those dreams shattered like fine china on a stone floor. The teaching position she had been promised, the one she'd traveled over 1,000 miles for, had been given to someone else 3 weeks prior. The town council hadn't bothered to send word east. Now here she sat, 22 years old, alone in a strange town with barely enough money for a night's lodging, much less a return ticket to Philadelphia. "Looks like you're having about the worst day a person can have," a deep voice drawled from behind her. Deanna whirled around, hastily wiping tears from her cheeks. A tall man stood at the bottom of the station steps, his figure backlit by the glow of a lantern he carried. His broad shoulders were draped in a worn leather duster, and beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, she could make out the outline of a strong jaw dusted with stubble. I'm fine," she lied, her voice betraying her with a crack. The stranger climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, as if approaching a spooked horse. As he drew closer, the lantern light revealed kind eyes the color of summer sky. "No offense intended, madam, but you don't look fine," he said, setting the lantern down beside her. "Been sitting here for nearly 2 hours now." Deanna stiffened. "You've been watching me." "Not intentionally. I run the livery down the way." He gestured toward a large building at the end of the street. "Had business at the telegraph office and noticed you when I passed by earlier. Figured you were waiting on someone, but seeing as the last train's gone and you're still here." He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave to it. "Isaac Thornton, at your service." Deanna hesitated, her mother's warnings about strange men echoing in her mind. But there was something reassuring about this man's presence, a steadiness that her frazzled nerves responded to. "Diana Bennett," she replied, offering a small nod but no hand. I arrived for a teaching position, but it seems the position has already been filled." Isaac's expression softened. "Ah, the school board. They're not known for their efficiency in communication." "Clearly," Deanna said, a fresh wave of tears threatening. "And now I'm stranded here with nowhere to go and hardly any money to get back home." Isaac settled himself on the step beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "If you don't mind my asking, where is home?" "Philadelphia," she replied, "where people are civilized enough to send a letter when plans change." A slight smile played at the corner of Isaac's mouth. "Cottonwood might not be Philadelphia, Miss Bennett, but it's got its merits. Good folks live here. Just takes them a while to show it sometimes." "Well, I won't be staying long enough to find out," Deanna said, clutching her valise tighter. "And where exactly are you planning to go tonight?" Isaac asked, his tone gentle but pointed. Diana opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was, she had no idea. The town's only hotel would cost nearly all she had left, and even then it would only buy her a night or two. After that. "I thought as much," Isaac said, standing and offering her his hand. "Look, my sister Martha runs a boarding house just up the street. Good, respectable place. She's always got room for a lady in need, and she'd skin me alive if I left you out here in the cold." Deanna eyed his extended hand warily. "I cannot accept charity, Mr. Thornton." "It's not charity. It's being neighborly," he countered. "And it's just for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out your next steps. Maybe even talk to the school board about their poor manners. I doubt that would help. You'd be surprised what can happen when you give a place a second chance, Isaac interrupted softly. He glanced around at the empty platform, then back at her tear-stained face. His expression was earnest, his blue eyes reflecting the glow of the lantern. Miss Bennet, I know Cottonwood isn't where you plan to be tonight, but for now, at least, you're already home. Something in his words, or perhaps it was the way he said them, with such simple certainty broke through Diana's defenses. She looked up at this tall stranger offering her kindness when she needed it most, and for the first time since stepping off the train, she felt a flicker of hope. With a deep breath, Diana placed her gloved hand in his. "One night," she agreed, "and then I'll decide what to do." Isaac nodded, a gentle smile warming his features as he helped her to her feet. "One night it is. Now, let's get you somewhere warm before you catch your death in this Wyoming chill." As they walked away from the station, Diana couldn't help but wonder if her misfortune might be something else entirely, the first unexpected step on a journey she never knew she needed to take. Martha Thornton's boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard structure with green shutters and a wide front porch. Despite the late hour, warm light spilled from several windows, and the faint sound of a piano drifted into the night air. Diana followed Isaac up the path, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after hours of crying. "Your sister won't mind a guest arriving so late?" she asked nervously. "Martha, Lord, no. Woman's got the biggest heart in the territory," Isaac replied, climbing the porch steps. "Fair warning, though, she'll likely try to feed you the moment you walk in, regardless of whether you're hungry." Before Diana could respond, the front door swung open, revealing a plump woman with Isaac's same blue eyes and a cloud of graying auburn hair piled atop her head. "Isaac Thornton, where have you been? Supper's been cold for." Martha's words halted as her gaze fell on Diana. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Martha, this is Miss Diana Bennet. She arrived on today's train for the teaching position, only to find it already filled. No one bothered to inform her before she made the journey from Philadelphia." Martha's hand flew to her chest. "Oh, you poor dear. Those buffoons on the school board, I told Hiram Wellesley they needed to send word, but did they listen? Of course not." She stepped aside, gesturing for Diana to enter. Come in, come in. You must be frozen and famished." Diana hesitated only briefly before the warmth and light of the house drew her in. The entryway opened to a comfortable parlor where 2 elderly men were engaged in a game of chess, while a young woman played softly on an upright piano in the corner. The air was redolent with the scents of home cooking and wood smoke. "Everyone, this is Miss Bennet," Martha announced. The room's occupants looked up with varying degrees of interest. "She'll be staying with us for a bit." Only for tonight," Diana clarified, uncomfortable with the assumption she'd be staying longer. Martha waved a dismissive hand. "We'll talk about that after you've had some food." "Isaac, take her valise up to the blue room. Miss Bennet, follow me to the kitchen. I've got stew still warm on the stove and fresh bread." Before Diana could protest, Martha had whisked her down a hallway to a large, warm kitchen that smelled divine. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast on the train. "Sit, sit," Martha insisted, already ladling thick stew into a bowl. "When did you last eat? You're thin as a rail." "This morning," Diana admitted, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. "Thank you for your kindness, Miss Thornton, but everyone calls me Martha," she corrected, placing the steaming bowl before Diana along with a thick slice of bread slathered with butter. "Been a spinster all my life and prefer it that way. Gives me freedom to run this place as I see fit." Diana nodded, taking a small bite of the stew. The rich flavor nearly brought tears to her eyes again, this time from gratitude rather than despair. "This is wonderful," she murmured. Martha beamed. "Eat up. Nothing helps a troubled mind like a full stomach." Isaac entered the kitchen, taking a seat across from Deanna. "Room's all ready. Best one in the house." "Oh, I couldn't," Deanna began. "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "It's available and it's yours for as long as you need it." "But I can't afford. We'll work something out," Martha said firmly. "Perhaps you could help around the house in exchange for lodging until you sort things out." Diana looked between the siblings, bewildered by their generosity. "Why are you both being so kind to a complete stranger?" Isaac and Martha exchanged a glance that seemed to contain an entire conversation. Finally, Martha spoke. "7 years ago, I stepped off that same train, following Isaac out west after our parents died. I had nothing but a trunk of clothes and a brother who'd come ahead to start a horse business." Martha's expression softened with memory. "First night here, I cried myself to sleep, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake leaving Philadelphia." Diana's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "You're from Philadelphia too?" Martha nodded. "Born and raised on Spruce Street. Father was a lawyer." "My family lives on Pine," Deanna said softly, the coincidence momentarily stealing her breath. "Well then," Martha said, with a satisfied nod, "it seems we were meant to cross paths, doesn't it?" Isaac watched the exchange with a gentle smile. "Cottonwood has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time." Deanna wasn't sure she believed in such providence, but as she finished her meal surrounded by the warmth of the Thorntons' kitchen, she had to admit that, for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope yet, but perhaps it was the beginning of acceptance. Later, as Martha showed her to the blue room, a cozy chamber with a comfortable bed, washstand, and small writing desk, Deanna found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. Martha patted her hand. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day, and things always look different in the morning light." Left alone, Deanna unpacked her nightgown and toiletries. As she prepared for bed, she moved to the window and parted the curtains. The main street of Cottonwood lay before her, bathed in moonlight. It was nothing like the bustling avenues of Philadelphia, yet there was something peaceful about its simplicity. Isaac's words echoed in her mind, "You're already home." Deanna couldn't possibly believe that, not yet. But as she slipped beneath the quilted covers and felt the day's tension begin to ebb from her body, she allowed herself to consider, just for a moment, that perhaps this detour in her plans wasn't the disaster it had first appeared to be. Dawn broke over Cottonwood with a spectacular display of pinks and golds that gradually illuminated Diana's room. She woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a town coming to life, the distant lowing of cattle, the clop of horses' hooves on packed dirt, voices calling greetings in the street below. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day crashed back and she sat up with a jolt. A soft knock at the door preceded Martha's cheerful voice. "Miss Bennet, are you awake? Breakfast is nearly ready." "Yes, thank you." "I'll be down shortly," Deanna called back, hastily rising to dress. She selected her second-best traveling dress, a deep blue wool with minimal adornment, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, Deanna hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. Her green eyes, usually bright with determination, appeared shadowed, uncertain. "What are you going to do now?" she whispered to her reflection. The only answer was the continued bustle from downstairs. When Deanna descended to the dining room, she found it full of boarders breaking their fast around a large oak table. Martha presided at one end, pouring coffee and directing the passing of platters laden with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Ah, there she is," Martha exclaimed. "Everyone, this is Miss Deanna Bennett, our newest guest. Deanna, meet the family." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions. Mr. Hadley and Mr. Peterson, the elderly chess players from the previous night, Mrs. Wilcox, a widow who taught piano lessons, the Gregory sisters, milliners who shared a room upstairs, and Mr. Jenkins, a quiet man who worked at the bank. Each greeted her with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. "Where's Isaac?" Deanna asked, noticing his absence as she took an empty chair. "Already at the livery," Martha replied, passing her a plate. "That brother of mine rises with the roosters, but he said he'd come by mid-morning to take you to see Mayor Wilson about your situation." Deanna nearly dropped her fork. "The mayor? Oh, I couldn't possibly. Nonsense, Mrs. Wilcox interjected. "That school board has been pulling these stunts for years. It's about time someone called them to account. And Harold Wilson owes Isaac a favor after that business with his prize stallion last spring," Mr. Peterson added with a knowing nod. Deanna looked around the table, bemused by how quickly these strangers had taken up her cause. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm not sure confronting the mayor is the solution. I was thinking I might inquire about work at one of the shops in town, just until I can save enough for a ticket back east." A hush fell over the table and several glances were exchanged. "Well," Martha said carefully, "you could do that, but it seems an awful waste of education and talent. Didn't you say you were qualified to teach?" "I am," Deanna confirmed. "I graduated from the Philadelphia Women's Normal School last spring. But the position here is filled." "So the position at the main schoolhouse is filled," Mr. Jenkins spoke up, his voice surprisingly deep for such a slight man. "But the settlement at Elk Creek lost their teacher last month when Miss Abernathy eloped with a cattle buyer. They've been looking for a replacement." Diana's heart quickened. "Elk Creek? Where is that?" "About 10 miles north," Martha explained. "Small community, mostly ranching families. They built a schoolhouse 2 years ago." "Do you think they'd consider me?" Deanna asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time. "Only one way to find out," Martha said with a smile. "Isaac can take you out there tomorrow if you'd like. He delivers horses to the Whitman Ranch nearby every month." Deanna hesitated, torn between the sudden prospect of securing a teaching position and her instinct to retreat to the familiar security of Philadelphia. "I'll think about it." After breakfast, Deanna helped Martha clear the table despite the older woman's protests. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Deanna found herself drawn to Martha's straightforward manner and kind heart. "How did you adjust?" Deanna asked as she dried a plate. "To life out here, I mean." "It's so different from Philadelphia." Martha's hands stilled in the wash basin. "It wasn't easy at first. I missed the theaters, the libraries, the society I was accustomed to." She resumed scrubbing. "But then I started to notice other things, the way the light changes over the mountains, how folks look after each other here without pretense, the pure joy of breathing air that isn't choked with coal smoke." She handed Deanna another wet plate. "One day, I realized I hadn't thought of Philadelphia as home in months. This place had worked its way into my heart when I wasn't looking." Deanna considered this as she placed the dried plate on the stack. "I'm not sure I could ever feel that way about somewhere so rough." Martha chuckled. "Cottonwood may not have Philadelphia's refinement, but it's growing. We've got a proper church now and a lending library at the general store. Why, just last year they started a ladies' literary society." Before Deanna could respond, the back door opened, and Isaac stepped into the kitchen. He'd removed his duster, and Deanna couldn't help but notice how his simple work clothes, a blue chambray shirt, and dark trousers accentuated his broad shoulders and lean frame. His hat was in his hands, and his dark hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just splashed water on his face. "Morning, ladies," he greeted them, his gaze lingering on Deanna. "Sleep well, Miss Bennet." "Surprisingly, yes," she admitted. "Your sister has been most gracious." "Martha's famous for her hospitality," Isaac said with obvious affection. "Almost as famous as she is for meddling in people's affairs." Martha swatted him with a dish towel. "It's not meddling to help a fellow Philadelphian in distress." Isaac laughed, a rich sound that Deanna found unexpectedly pleasing. "Fair enough." He turned to Deanna. "I heard from Martha that there might be a teaching opportunity at Elk Creek. Interested in riding out there tomorrow to inquire?" Deanna hesitated. I'm not sure. It seems hasty to commit to something else when my original plans fell through so completely." Isaac studied her, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Tell you what, why don't we start with a visit to Mayor Wilson this morning? Get to the bottom of what happened with the teaching position here. Then you can decide your next move with all the facts." It was a reasonable suggestion, and Deanna found herself nodding. "Yes, that makes sense, thank you." "Good." Isaac replaced his hat. "I'll bring the buggy around in half an hour if that suits." "That would be fine, Mr. Thornton." "Isaac," he corrected with a smile. "If we're going to battle town politics together, we might as well be on familiar terms." After he left, Martha gave Deanna a knowing look that made her cheeks warm. "What?" Deanna asked defensively. "Nothing," Martha replied, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Just thinking it's been a while since I've seen my brother so eager to play White Knight." "He's simply being kind," Deanna insisted. "Oh, Isaac is always kind," Martha agreed, "but he doesn't usually offer personal escorts to the mayor's office or volunteer for day-long rides to Elk Creek." Deanna chose to ignore the implication, focusing instead on finishing the dishes. But as she prepared for her meeting with the mayor, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of something unfamiliar when she thought of spending more time in Isaac Thornton's company. Precisely half an hour later, Isaac appeared at the front door with a well-maintained buggy drawn by a handsome bay gelding. Deanna emerged from the boarding house in her best walking dress, a forest green wool that complemented her eyes, and a small bonnet that did little to tame the few curls that had escaped her pins in the Wyoming breeze. "You look lovely, Miss Bennet," Isaac said, offering his hand to help her into the buggy. "Thank you," she replied, settling her skirts. "And you may call me Deanna if you wish." His smile brightened. "Deanna it is, then." As they drove through Cottonwood, Isaac pointed out the various establishments: the general store, the assay office, the small but respectable bank, and the Silver Spur Saloon, which he noted with a wry smile she might want to avoid. "It's not as wild as it was 5 years ago," he explained, "but still no place for a lady." Diana observed the town with new eyes in the clear light of day. Cottonwood was certainly small compared to Philadelphia, but it had a frontier charm she hadn't appreciated in her distress the previous evening. The buildings were mostly wooden, with a few brick structures indicating the town's growing prosperity. People moved along the boardwalks with purpose, nodding greetings to Isaac as they passed. "Everyone seems to know you," Deanna remarked. "Hard not to know everyone in a town this size," Isaac replied. "Especially when you're in the business of providing horses. Sooner or later, everyone needs one." "How long have you lived here?" 8 years now. Came out after the war with not much more than the clothes on my back and a knack for handling horses." Isaac guided the buggy around a slow-moving wagon. "Started working at the old livery, saved every penny, and eventually bought the place when Mr. Dawson decided to retire to Denver." "That's quite an accomplishment," Deanna said, genuinely impressed. Isaac shrugged. but she could see he was pleased by her acknowledgement. This country rewards hard work and determination. It's not always easy, but there's an honesty to the struggle that I've come to appreciate. They arrived at the mayor's office, a modest building adjacent to the town hall. Isaac helped Deanna down from the buggy, his hand warm and steady around hers. The brief contact sent an unexpected tingle up her arm, which she firmly attributed to nerves about the upcoming confrontation. Mayor Harold Wilson proved to be a rotund man with impressive mutton chops and a harried expression that suggested he would rather be anywhere but behind his cluttered desk. He greeted Isaac warmly, but eyed Deanna with wary curiosity. "Miss Bennett has come all the way from Philadelphia for the teaching position that was advertised in the Eastern papers," Isaac explained after introductions were made, only to find it filled weeks ago. The mayor's bushy eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, that's unfortunate. But I fail to see what can be done about it now. Miss Clarkson is already established in the position." Deanna leaned forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "With all due respect, Mr. Mayor, I sold my personal belongings, gave up my position as a tutor, and traveled over 1,000 miles based on the advertisement placed by your school board. The least the town could do is compensate me for my travel expenses, so I may return home." The mayor tugged at his collar uncomfortably. "Compensation? Now, that's a matter for the school board, not the mayor's office, Harold," Isaac interrupted, his tone friendly but firm. "Remember that situation with Thunderhead last spring? How I worked day and night to save that stallion when everyone else said he was done for." The mayor's face reddened. "Of course, and I'm eternally grateful. Consider this an opportunity to return the favor," Isaac said smoothly. "All Deanna's asking for is the fare back to Philadelphia, which seems more than fair given the circumstances." Mayor Wilson looked between them, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he sighed heavily. "I suppose I could speak to the board about a partial reimbursement, but it might take some time to arrange the funds." "How much time?" Deanna pressed. "A week, perhaps 2, the mayor hedged. Isaac crossed his arms. "Meanwhile, Deanna needs somewhere to stay, food to eat." The mayor's expression brightened. "Actually, that reminds me. I received a telegram just yesterday from Elk Creek. They're in desperate need of a teacher. Their last one ran off with some cattle buyer from Kansas City." He turned to Deanna. "You're qualified, I presume?" "Yes, but perfect," Mayor Wilson exclaimed, clearly relieved to see a solution. "You could take the position at Elk Creek while waiting for your reimbursement. The pay is decent, and they provide housing for the teacher. By the time the school term ends in June, you'd have more than enough for your return ticket, with some to spare." Deanna hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden proposal. "I'm not sure." "It's only temporary," the mayor continued, warming to his idea. "Just until summer. And you'd be doing the community a great service. Those children have been without proper instruction for nearly a month." Deanna glanced at Isaac, who gave her an encouraging nod. "It's a good opportunity," he said softly. "And Elk Creek is a beautiful spot. The schoolhouse sits right at the base of the mountains." Deanna bit her lip, torn between the practical solution before her and her desire to return to the familiar comforts of Philadelphia. But the thought of children without a teacher tugged at her sense of duty. "I would need to see the school first," she said finally, "and meet with the families." Of course," Mayor Wilson agreed, visibly relieved. "I'll send word to Elk Creek today that you'll be coming to discuss the position." He looked at Isaac. "You could take her out there, couldn't you, Thornton? I believe the Whitman Ranch was expecting a delivery soon anyway." "Tomorrow," Isaac confirmed, "if that suits Deanna." All eyes turned to her, waiting for her decision. Deanna took a deep breath, surprised to find that the prospect of teaching at Elk Creek stirred a sense of purpose within her that had been missing since her arrival. "Very well," she agreed. "I'll go to Elk Creek tomorrow to discuss the position. But I make no promises beyond that." Mayor Wilson beamed. "Excellent. I'll draft a letter of introduction immediately, and I'll speak to the school board about your reimbursement, regardless of what you decide." As they left the mayor's office, Deanna felt strangely lighter. She had come seeking restitution and a way home, but instead found herself considering an unexpected path forward. "Thank you for your support in there," she said to Isaac as he helped her back into the buggy. "You did all the hard work," he replied with a smile. "I just reminded Harold of a debt he owed. Still, I appreciate it." Deanna adjusted her bonnet against the strengthening breeze. "You must think me terribly fickle, considering staying after I was so determined to leave." Isaac clicked to the horse and set the buggy in motion before responding. "Not fickle, adaptable. That's a valuable quality out here." He glanced at her, his expression earnest. "The West has a way of changing a person's plans, Deanna, sometimes for the better, if you're willing to see the opportunity in the setback." Deanna pondered his words as they made their way back through town. Perhaps there was wisdom in his frontier philosophy. After all, what was waiting for her in Philadelphia? A return to tutoring the spoiled children of society families. Living in her parents' home, subject to their expectations and disappointments. Here, at least, she would be truly teaching, making a difference in children's lives. And she would be independent, something she had always valued but found difficult to achieve within the confines of Philadelphia society. "I think," she said slowly, "that I will give Elk Creek a fair chance. At the very least, it will be an adventure to tell my grandchildren about someday." Isaac's smile widened. "That's the spirit, and who knows, you might find that Wyoming grows on you." Deanna wasn't ready to admit that possibility aloud. But as they passed the boarding house and continued toward the livery so Isaac could show her his business, she felt a curious sensation like turning the page of a book to discover the story was taking an unexpected but intriguing direction. The livery stable occupied a large plot at the edge of town, a sprawling wooden structure with a corral and several smaller outbuildings. As they approached, Diana could hear the nickering of horses and the rhythmic pounding of a hammer. "Welcome to Thornton's Livery and Horse Trading," Isaac announced with undisguised pride as he brought the buggy to a halt. "Not as refined as Philadelphia's establishments, but it suits our needs out here." Diana was surprised by the operation size and obvious organization. The main stable was well constructed, with fresh paint and sturdy doors. The corral held about a dozen horses of varying colors and breeds, all appearing healthy and well cared for. "It's quite impressive," she said honestly. "I expected something more primitive." Isaac laughed as he helped her down. "We may be on the frontier, but that doesn't mean we live like savages. Come, I'll show you around." Inside the stable, the air was warm with the earthy scents of hay, leather, and horses. Stalls lined both walls, many occupied by handsome animals who watched their progress with intelligent eyes. A burly man with an impressive mustache looked up from where he was repairing a saddle. "Jake, this is Miss Deanna Bennett," Isaac introduced them. "Deanna, this is Jake Hollister, the best horseman this side of the Mississippi and my right-hand man." Jake touched his forehead in greeting. "Madam, don't believe a word he says about me. I just shovel manure and try to keep him from getting kicked in the head." Deanna smiled at the easy camaraderie between the men. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hollister." "Jake's been with me since I bought the place," Isaac explained. "Taught me half of what I know about horses, and he still has the other half to learn," Jake retorted good-naturedly. As they continued the tour, Diana was struck by Isaac's knowledge and obvious passion for his work. He introduced her to several horses by name, explaining their lineage and temperaments with the precision of a scholar discussing rare manuscripts. "This is Midnight," he said, stopping before a stall housing a magnificent black stallion. The horse approached, extending his velvet muzzle toward Isaac's outstretched hand. "He's special. Saved him from a cruel owner 2 years ago. Wasn't sure he'd ever trust humans again, but we've come to an understanding, haven't we, boy?" The tenderness with which Isaac stroked the stallion's nose revealed a gentleness that contrasted with his rugged exterior. Diana found herself watching his hands, strong, capable hands marked with the calluses of honest work, and wondered how they would feel against her skin. The thought startled her, and she quickly redirected her attention to the horse. "He's beautiful. Would you like to pet him?" Isaac asked. "He's cautious with strangers, but he can sense a good heart." Hesitantly, Diana extended her hand. The stallion regarded her for a moment with liquid brown eyes before stretching his neck to sniff her fingers. After a tense moment, he allowed her to stroke his nose. "He likes you," Isaac said softly, standing close enough that Diana could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "That's rare. Midnight's usually particular about who he lets near him." "I've always loved horses," Diana confessed. "My father kept a pair for our carriage, and I used to sneak them treats when the groom wasn't looking." Isaac chuckled. "A woman of hidden depths." Their eyes met over the stall door, and Diana felt a curious fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with horses, and everything to do with the way Isaac was looking at her, as if he were truly seeing her, not just the proper Philadelphia lady she presented to the world. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities, until Jake's voice broke the spell. "Isaac, that Army lieutenant is here about the horses for Fort Laramie." Isaac reluctantly turned away. "Duty calls. Would you mind waiting in the office? This shouldn't take long." Diana nodded, following his directions to a small room at the front of the stable. The office was simple but orderly, with a desk covered in ledgers, a few chairs, and walls adorned with horse bridles and framed illustrations of notable stallions. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated comforting warmth. While waiting, Diana examined the desk, noting the meticulous bookkeeping evidenced in the open ledger. Isaac Thornton was clearly a man who took his business seriously. It was a far cry from her initial impression of cowboys as uncouth, uneducated drifters. Through the window, she could see Isaac conversing with a uniformed officer beside the corral. Even from this distance, there was something compelling about his presence, a natural confidence that commanded respect without demanding it. Diana realized with a start that she was staring and quickly looked away, her cheeks warm. What was happening to her? She'd known the man barely a day, yet she found herself drawn to him in a way that was both unfamiliar and slightly alarming. "Get hold of yourself, Diana," she muttered. "You're here to secure a teaching position, not to moon over the first kind man you encounter." And yet, as she watched Isaac shake hands with the lieutenant before striding back toward the office, Diana couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse or the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. The day passed swiftly after that, with Isaac showing Diana more of Cottonwood than she'd imagined existed. They visited the general store, where Mr. Harrington, the proprietor, proudly showed her the small lending library in the back corner. They passed the dressmaker's shop, the blacksmith, and the small church with its freshly painted steeple. By the time they returned to the boarding house for supper, Diana had a newfound appreciation for the frontier town and its industrious residents. These weren't the uncultured barbarians she'd imagined, but hardworking people building a community from the ground up. Supper at Martha's was a lively affair, with the boarders eager to hear about Diana's meeting with the mayor and the possibility of the Elk Creek position. Their genuine interest touched her, making her feel less like a stranger and more like a welcomed addition to their circle. "Elk Creek's got good folks," Mr. Peterson commented as he passed her the mashed potatoes. "Simple living, but honest." Their last harvest festival was quite the event, won 3 ribbons for my preserves. "And the scenery is breathtaking," Mrs. Wilcox added. "The creek itself runs right through a meadow full of wildflowers come spring." Isaac, seated across from Deanna, caught her eye with a smile. "Sounds like you're getting quite the sales pitch." "Indeed," Deanna agreed, returning his smile. "If the position is half as appealing as its surroundings, I may have a difficult decision ahead." Later, as the evening wound down and the boarders retired to their rooms or quiet activities in the parlor, Diana found herself alone with Isaac on the front porch. The night was clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust on black velvet, a sight far more magnificent than anything she'd seen through Philadelphia's coal smoke haze. "It's beautiful," she murmured, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "One of the things I love most about Wyoming," Isaac replied, leaning against the porch railing. "You never feel small in a city surrounded by buildings and people. Out here under these stars, you realize just how vast the world really is." Diana considered this. "I always thought I'd feel lost in such vastness, but there's something comforting about it." "Exactly," Isaac said, his voice warm with approval. "It puts things in perspective, makes you realize which problems are worth worrying about and which aren't." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the distant piano music drifting from the parlor window. Diana was struck by how comfortable she felt in Isaac's presence, despite knowing him such a short time. There was an ease between them that she'd rarely experienced with men in Philadelphia, where conversations were often exercises in careful social navigation. "What time should I be ready tomorrow?" she asked eventually. "Early, if you don't mind. It's a fair ride to Elk Creek and I'd like to get there with plenty of daylight to spare." Isaac turned to face her, his expression earnest in the soft glow from the window. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Deanna considered the question. "A little," she admitted, "but also excited, I think. Yesterday, I felt as though my world had ended when I discovered the teaching position was filled. Now, I'm curious to see what Elk Creek has to offer." "That's a good sign," Isaac said with a smile. "Being open to possibilities is half the battle out here." As Deanna prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the whirlwind turn her life had taken in just 24 hours. From despair on the cold station steps to anticipation for what tomorrow might bring, all because a kind cowboy had stopped to offer help when she needed it most. "You're already home," he had said. Diana wasn't ready to believe that yet. But for the first time, she was willing to consider that home might be something she could find, rather than something she had left behind. The journey to Elk Creek began with the first light of dawn, a soft golden glow that gradually illuminated the distant mountains. Deanna waited on the boarding house porch, a borrowed carpetbag containing a change of clothes at her feet. Martha had insisted she take provisions for an overnight stay, just in case the weather turns. Isaac arrived with a light wagon instead of the buggy, drawn by a matched pair of dappled grays. He wore a sheepskin coat against the morning chill, and his customary hat was pulled low over his brow. "Good morning," he called, jumping down to help with her bag. "Sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes," Deanna replied. She had dressed practically in her sturdiest traveling dress and a warm woolen cloak. Her hair was secured in a simple knot, covered by a sensible bonnet that offered protection from both sun and wind. "Are we expecting inclement weather?" Isaac glanced at the clear sky. "Not likely, but it's always wise to be prepared out here. The weather can change faster than a politician's promises." He helped her onto the wagon seat, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Martha pack you enough food for a cavalry regiment?" Deanna laughed. "Nearly. I tried to tell her it was unnecessary for a day trip, but she insisted." "That's Martha, for you never met a person she didn't want to feed." Isaac climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Ready for your adventure, Miss Philadelphia?" There was such warmth in his teasing that Diana couldn't help but smile. "As ready as I'll ever be, Mr. Wyoming." The wagon pulled away from the boarding house, passing through Cottonwood just as the town was coming to life. Shopkeepers swept boardwalks, the smell of baking bread wafted from the small bakery, and early risers nodded greetings as they passed. Once beyond the town limits, the landscape opened before them, rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the approaching summer. The trail followed the meandering course of a creek, lined with cottonwoods and willows whose leaves shimmered silver green in the morning light. "It's breathtaking," Deanna murmured, taking in the vastness of the Wyoming territory. "This is one of my favorite stretches," Isaac replied. "Wait until you see it in late June, when the wildflowers bloom across the meadows, like nature's own patchwork quilt." As they traveled, Isaac pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, tales of the first settlers, the native Shoshone who still camped in the high country during summer months, and the gradual transformation of wilderness into ranching country. Deanna found herself captivated not just by the stories, but by the storyteller. Isaac spoke with such evident love for this land that she began to see it through his eyes, not as a harsh, uncivilized territory, but as a place of beauty and possibility. "How did you come to Wyoming?" she asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. They stood beside the creek, watching water tumble over smooth stones. "After the war, you said, but what drew you here specifically?" Isaac was silent for a moment, absently stroking one of the horses' necks. "I served with a Wyoming man in the Union Army, David Callahan. We became close as brothers during those years." His expression darkened with memory. "David didn't make it home. Took a Confederate bullet at Petersburg just weeks before the surrender." "I'm so sorry," Deanna said softly. Isaac nodded his acknowledgement. "Before he died, he made me promise to deliver some personal effects to his family in Laramie. Letters, a pocket watch, a lock of hair for his mother." He stared at the distant mountains. "When I got here, something about the country spoke to me. The openness, the honesty of the landscape. After years of smoke and blood and chaos, it felt clean, like a place where a man could start fresh." Deanna studied his profile, seeing beyond the confident exterior to the young soldier who had sought healing in this wild place. "And did you start fresh?" His gaze returned to her, a smile softening his features. "I did. Every day here feels like a gift David would have wanted me to have." The simple sincerity of his words touched something deep within Deanna. In Philadelphia, men rarely spoke so openly about matters of the heart. Feelings were disguised behind social niceties and proper restraint. Isaac's straightforward honesty was as refreshing as the clear mountain air. They continued their journey, the conversation flowing easily between them. Deanna found herself sharing stories of her own life, her education at the normal school, her dreams of making a difference through teaching, even her complicated relationship with parents who had expected her to marry well rather than pursue a career. "They weren't opposed to my becoming a teacher exactly," she explained. They simply couldn't understand why I would choose chalk dust and rowdy children over a comfortable home with a suitable husband. "And what did you tell them?" Isaac asked. Diana smiled at the memory. "That I might find a suitable husband someday, but first I needed to be a suitable person, someone with purpose beyond hosting dinner parties and producing heirs." Isaac chuckled. "I'd have liked to see their faces." "Father turned quite purple," Deanna admitted with a laugh. "But eventually they accepted my decision, though I suspect they secretly hoped the teaching ambition would pass once I came to my senses." "And has it? Passed, I mean." Deanna shook her head firmly. "No, if anything, my conviction has grown stronger. There's such satisfaction in watching a child grasp a new concept, in knowing you've helped shape a young mind." She glanced at him sideways. "I suppose that sounds terribly idealistic." "Not at all," Isaac replied, his tone serious despite his smile. "Idealism is undervalued out here. We need more of it, not less." By midday, the landscape began to change, with the trail climbing steadily into more rugged country. Stands of pine appeared among the cottonwoods, and the distant mountains seemed to draw closer with each mile. "Almost there," Isaac announced as they crested a ridge. "Elk Creek is just beyond that next rise." Deanna felt a flutter of nervousness mingled with anticipation. What would the settlement be like? Would the families welcome an Eastern teacher, or view her as an outsider trying to impose foreign ideas? Her questions were answered as the wagon rounded a bend, and Elk Creek came into view. Nestled in a broad valley with the creek winding through its center, the settlement was smaller than Cottonwood, but no less charming. A dozen or so houses and buildings were arranged along what passed for a main street, with more homes visible on the surrounding hillsides. At the far end of the settlement stood a small white clapboard building that could only be the schoolhouse, its bell tower catching the midday sun. "It's lovely," Deanna breathed. "Told you," Isaac said with evident satisfaction. "That's the Whitman Ranch house up on that rise, the two-story place with the big barn. Timothy Whitman is head of the school committee, so we'll stop there first." As they approached the settlement, Deanna found herself straightening her bonnet and smoothing her skirts, suddenly conscious of making a good impression. This might be the place she would call home for the next 6 months, possibly longer, if the position proved satisfactory. The thought gave her pause. When had she started considering the possibility of staying beyond the school term? Just days ago, her only goal had been to return to Philadelphia as quickly as possible. The Whitman Ranch was a substantial property, with a well-maintained house, large barn, and several outbuildings. A split-rail fence enclosed a front yard planted with young trees, and a windmill creaked lazily in the breeze. As Isaac brought the wagon to a halt before the house, the front door opened to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He was followed by a pleasant-looking woman in a calico dress, wiping her hands on an apron. "Isaac Thornton," the man called, striding forward with an outstretched hand. "Right on time with those horses, I see." "Always, Mr. Whitman," Isaac replied, jumping down to shake hands. "And I've brought someone you might be interested in meeting." He helped Deanna from the wagon. "This is Miss Diana Bennett, a qualified teacher from Philadelphia. Mayor Wilson suggested she might be a good candidate for your schoolhouse." Timothy Whitman's expression brightened considerably. "Is that so? Well, this is a stroke of luck. We've been at our wits' end trying to find someone suitable." He turned to his wife. "Margaret, fetch the children. They'll want to meet Miss Bennett." Margaret Whitman stepped forward, offering Deanna a warm smile. "Please come inside. You must be tired after your journey. I've just put coffee on the stove." Deanna found herself ushered into a comfortable farmhouse kitchen, where she was promptly seated at a large oak table and presented with coffee and freshly baked biscuits with honey. The Whitmans' 4 children ranging from 6 to 16 were summoned and introduced, each regarding Diana with varying degrees of curiosity and shyness. While Isaac discussed the horse delivery with Mr. Whitman, Margaret asked Diana about her qualifications and teaching experience. Diana explained her education at the normal school and her year of tutoring in Philadelphia, carefully outlining her teaching philosophy. "I believe in a balanced approach," she said, warming to her subject. "Fundamentals are essential, of course, reading, writing, arithmetic. But I also value creative thinking and practical knowledge. Books are wonderful teachers, but so is the world around us." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That sounds sensible. Our children need education that will serve them in this life, not just prepare them for a world they may never see." By the time Isaac returned to the kitchen, Diana and Margaret were deep in discussion about potential improvements to the school curriculum, while the younger Whitman children had overcome their initial shyness and were eagerly showing Diana their school books. "Looks like you're making yourself at home," Isaac observed with a smile. Mr. Whitman clapped him on the shoulder. "I think we've found our teacher, Thornton. Miss Bennet seems perfect for what we need." He turned to Diana. "Would you be willing to see the schoolhouse now? It's modest, but we're quite proud of it." Diana agreed readily, and soon they were making their way through Elk Creek toward the white building at the settlement's edge. As they passed, residents emerged from homes and businesses to greet the Whitmans and regard Diana with open curiosity. Mr. Whitman made introductions, and Diana found herself shaking hands with what seemed like half the settlement's population. "Word travels fast in small communities," Isaac murmured as they approached the schoolhouse. "By supper time, everyone in Elk Creek will know about the new teacher from Philadelphia." The schoolhouse proved to be charming despite its simplicity, a single large room with windows on both sides to capture the light, rows of sturdy desks, a teacher's desk on a small raised platform, and a black slate board covering most of the front wall. A pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, and bookshelves lined the back wall, though they were sparsely filled. "We've been adding to the library gradually," Mr. Whitman explained, noting Diana's gaze. "Started with just the basic primers and a Bible, but folks donate books when they can. The children made those shelves themselves in last year's carpentry lessons." "It's wonderful," Diana said honestly, running her hand along a desk and imagining the children who would sit there, looking to her for knowledge and guidance. "There's a small living quarters attached at the back, Mrs. Whitman added, leading Diana through a door at the rear of the classroom. "Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough for one person." The teacher's quarters consisted of a small bedroom, a sitting area with a fireplace, and a tiny kitchen. The furnishings were simple but well made, and someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the small table beside a rocking chair near the window. "Margaret's touch," Mr. Whitman said with a fond glance at his wife. "Thought it might make the place feel more welcoming." Diana was touched by the thoughtfulness. "It's perfect," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. The little apartment was a far cry from her parents' elegant Philadelphia home, but it had a cozy charm that appealed to her. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat. "Now about terms. School runs from September through June, though we've lost nearly a month already with Miss Abernathy's sudden departure. Salary is $40 a month, plus the living quarters. We provide firewood for heating, and there's a well just behind the building for water." Diana's eyes widened slightly. The salary was actually higher than she had expected for a frontier settlement. "That seems more than fair. We value education here," Mr. Whitman said simply. Most of us didn't have much schooling ourselves, which is why we want better for our children." He extended his hand. "So, do we have ourselves a teacher, Miss Bennet?" Diana hesitated only briefly, glancing at Isaac, who stood in the doorway watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. Something in his steady gaze gave her courage. "Yes, Mr. Whitman," she said firmly, shaking his hand. "You have a teacher." The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirl of activity. Mrs. Whitman introduced Diana to several mothers from the settlement, who promptly invited her to the weekly quilting circle. Mr. Whitman showed her the school records and register, explaining that 28 children of various ages would be under her tutelage. Plans were made for Diana to return in 3 days' time with her belongings, ready to begin teaching the following Monday. Throughout it all, Isaac remained a steady presence at her side, offering quiet support and occasional explanations of local customs or histories. Diana found herself repeatedly glancing his way, drawing confidence from his encouraging smiles. As the afternoon waned toward evening, it became clear that they would not make it back to Cottonwood before nightfall. Mrs. Whitman immediately insisted they stay for supper and spend the night at the ranch. "We have plenty of room," she declared. "Isaac can bunk in the hands' quarters and Miss Bennet can take our guest room. I won't hear of you traveling those roads in the dark." Isaac accepted with good grace, clearly accustomed to such frontier hospitality. Diana, though initially hesitant, found herself relieved at the prospect of a proper meal and rest before the return journey. Supper at the Whitman home was a lively affair, with the children eager to share stories and ask Diana countless questions about Philadelphia. What were the streets like? Did she ever see the Liberty Bell? Were there really buildings taller than 3 stories? Diana answered patiently, increasingly charmed by their bright faces and genuine curiosity. These were the children she would be teaching sharp minds hungry for knowledge about a world beyond their valley. After the meal, while Mrs. Whitman and her oldest daughter cleared the table, Mr. Whitman invited Isaac to the porch for cigars. Diana helped with the dishes, then found herself drawn to the porch as well, where the men's conversation paused at her approach. "Don't stop on my account," she said, settling into a wicker chair. "I'm just enjoying the evening air." The view from the Whitman porch was spectacular, rolling pastureland giving way to pine-covered hills, with mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. In the valley below, lights twinkled from the homes of Elk Creek, and the distant sound of a fiddle drifted up from somewhere in the settlement. "Someone's celebrating," Mr. Whitman observed. "Probably at the Jorgensens'. Their oldest boy got engaged last week." "Seems there's always a reason to celebrate out here," Isaac remarked, exhaling a stream of cigar smoke. "Barn raisings, harvests, engagements, new babies. Life's hard enough without missing chances for joy," Mr. Whitman replied sagely. He glanced at Diana. "That's something you'll discover about these parts, Miss Bennet. Folks make their own happiness where they can find it." Diana nodded, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue of the sky. There was a simplicity to life here that she found increasingly appealing, a focus on what truly mattered rather than the artificial social constraints she'd known in Philadelphia. Later, as Mrs. Whitman showed her to the guest room, Diana found herself thinking about the decision she'd made. 6 months in Elk Creek. 6 months of teaching frontier children, living in that small apartment behind the schoolhouse, becoming part of this community so different from anything she'd known. "You've made quite an impression," Mrs. Whitman said, as she placed a neatly folded nightgown on the bed. "Timothy is already singing your praises, and he's not an easy man to impress when it comes to education." "Everyone has been so welcoming," Diana replied. "I confess it's not what I expected when I first arrived in Wyoming." Mrs. Whitman smiled knowingly. And what about Isaac Thornton? He seems quite taken with you. Deanna felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Thornton has been very kind in helping me navigate this situation. Indeed. Mrs. Whitman's eyes twinkled. And a fine man he is, too. One of the most respected in the county, not to mention unmarried. Mrs. Whitman, Margaret, please. Margaret, Deanna amended. I've only just met Mr. Thornton, and I've only just accepted a teaching position. Romance is the furthest thing from my mind right now. Margaret patted her hand. Of course, dear. But out here, life has a way of moving faster than in the East. When the right person comes along, folks don't waste time with unnecessary courtship rituals. She moved toward the door. Sleep well. Breakfast is at 6. Left alone, Deanna changed into the borrowed nightgown and prepared for bed, her mind swirling with the day's events and Margaret's not-so-subtle hints about Isaac. Was the attraction she felt toward him so obvious, and was it possible he felt the same? The thought both thrilled and frightened her. She had come west to teach, to be independent, to escape the marriage-minded matchmaking of Philadelphia society. The last thing she needed was to fall for the first kind man she met in Wyoming. And yet, as she drifted toward sleep in the unfamiliar bed, it was Isaac's face that filled her thoughts, his steady blue eyes, the gentle curve of his smile, the quiet strength he radiated without effort or pretense. This is absurd, she whispered to the darkness. You barely know him. But another voice, one from deeper within, whispered back. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind hasn't figured out yet. The return journey to Cottonwood the following day seemed to pass more quickly than the outward trip. Perhaps it was the growing familiarity with the landscape. Or perhaps it was the easy conversation that flowed between Deanna and Isaac as the wagon rolled through the Wyoming countryside. So, a schoolteacher in Elk Creek, Isaac remarked as they passed a herd of pronghorn antelope grazing in the distance. Not exactly what you had planned when you stepped off that train. Deanna smiled, watching the graceful animals bound away. Not at all. But I'm finding that plans have a way of changing out here. That they do, Isaac agreed. Wyoming has a way of reshaping a person's expectations, usually for the better in my experience. They discussed her preparations for the move to Elk Creek, with Isaac offering practical advice about winter provisions and what supplies she might need that weren't readily available in the small settlement. Deanna listened attentively, grateful for his knowledge and increasingly comfortable with the idea of this new chapter in her life. Martha will miss having you at the boarding house, Isaac said as Cottonwood came into view in the late afternoon light. She's grown quite fond of you in a short time. And I of her, Deanna replied sincerely. Your sister is a remarkable woman. That she is, strongest person I know. Isaac's expression softened with affection. She gave up a lot to follow me out here after our parents died, never complained once even when times were lean. You're fortunate to have each other. Isaac nodded. Family's important out here, not just blood relations but the family you build around yourself. Neighbors, friends, they're what see you through the hard times. As they entered Cottonwood, Deanna noticed a commotion near the town hall, a crowd gathering, voices raised in what sounded like celebration. What's happening? She asked, curious. Isaac reined in the horses, standing slightly to get a better view. Looks like they're putting up decorations. Must be for the harvest festival this weekend. He glanced at Deanna. I'd forgotten all about it with everything else going on. Harvest festival. Annual celebration before winter sets in. Dancing, food, games for the children. Whole county turns out for it. Isaac hesitated, then added casually, Would you care to attend? With me, I mean. As my guest. The invitation caught Deanna by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have given the growing connection between them. She felt a flutter of pleasure at the thought of spending an evening in Isaac's company that wasn't related to her teaching dilemma. "I would like that very much," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. Isaac's smile was warm enough to chase away the late afternoon chill. "Saturday evening, then. I'll call for you at the boarding house at 7. When they arrived at Martha's, Diana was greeted like a returning hero. News of her acceptance of the Elk Creek position had somehow preceded her, and the boarders gathered in the parlor to hear all about the settlement and the schoolhouse. "Elk Creek's growing faster than most folks realize," Mr. Jenkins commented. "With the new stage route coming through next spring, they'll be seeing more traffic than Cottonwood before long. And their annual May picnic is not to be missed," Mrs. Wilcox added. "People come from 3 counties for Margaret Whitman's strawberry pie." Diana absorbed these details, building a mental picture of the community that would be her home. It was strange how quickly she'd shifted from viewing Wyoming as a temporary inconvenience to seeing it as a place where she might put down roots, however tentative. Later, after supper, Deanna found Martha alone in the kitchen. "Isaac tells me you're attending the Harvest Festival with him," Martha said without preamble, her hands busy with dishes. Deanna shouldn't have been surprised that Isaac had already spoken to his sister. "Yes, he invited me this afternoon." Martha's smile was knowing. "He hasn't escorted anyone to a social function in over 2 years, not since that business with Charlotte Watson." Diana's curiosity was piqued despite herself. Charlotte Watson. Martha hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. Daughter of a rancher over in Johnson County. Everyone thought they'd announce an engagement, but she left suddenly for finishing school in Denver and returned 6 months later engaged to a banker's son. She shrugged. "Isaac never spoke of it, but I know it hurt him deeply." Diana absorbed this information, feeling a strange twist of sympathy for Isaac and an inexplicable dislike for the unknown Charlotte Watson. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Water under the bridge now," Martha said firmly. "What matters is that he's moving forward, and I couldn't be happier about his choice of company." She dried her hands on her apron. "Now, about this festival, do you have something suitable to wear?" Diana thought of her limited wardrobe, packed for a teaching position rather than social events. "I have a blue silk that might be appropriate, though it's perhaps more formal than necessary for a country gathering." Martha considered this. "The festival's a special occasion. People dress in their finest." She studied Deanna thoughtfully. "The blue will do nicely, I think." Isaac's always had a fondness for that color. Over the next few days, Diana divided her time between preparations for her move to Elk Creek and helping Martha around the boarding house. She wrote a long letter to her parents explaining her new position and asking them to forward some additional books and teaching materials. She didn't mention Isaac specifically, referring to him only as the livery owner who helped me secure the position. On the day before the festival, Diana accompanied Martha to the general store for supplies. As they examined bolts of fabric, the bell above the door jangled, and Diana looked up to see a striking woman enter. Tall and blonde, with a figure accentuated by a fashionable riding habit, she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to attention. "Charlotte Watson," Martha murmured, confirming Diana's immediate suspicion. "In town visiting her aunt, I hear." Deanna tried not to stare as Charlotte approached the counter, but found her gaze drawn back repeatedly. This was the woman who had broken Isaac's heart. She was undeniably beautiful, with delicate features and a porcelain complexion unmarred by the Wyoming sun. "Martha," Charlotte greeted them with a practiced smile. "How lovely to see you. And who is your friend?" "Charlotte, this is Deanna Bennett, our new teacher for Elk Creek," Martha replied, her tone polite but cool. "Deanna Charlotte Watson Fleming." "Fleming now, yes," Charlotte corrected, extending a gloved hand to Deanna. "I married Edward last spring. Denver society, you know. His father owns 3 banks. How nice for you," Deanna responded, shaking the offered hand briefly. There was something calculated in Charlotte's perfect smile that set Deanna's teeth on edge. "From the East, are you?" Charlotte continued, eyeing Deanna's clothing. "I can always tell. There's a certain refinement that the West hasn't quite managed to cultivate yet." Before Deanna could respond, the store door opened again, and Isaac entered. He paused momentarily upon seeing Charlotte, his expression flickering with something Deanna couldn't quite interpret before settling into neutral politeness. "Charlotte," he acknowledged with a nod. "Heard you were in town." "Isaac," Charlotte's voice softened, taking on a warmth that hadn't been present moments before. "You're looking well. Life agrees with you. Can't complain," he replied evenly. His gaze shifted to Deanna and his expression visibly lightened. "Deanna, I was hoping to find you. Midnight's taken quite a shine to you. Thought you might like to visit him again before you leave for Elk Creek." Deanna felt Charlotte's assessing gaze as Isaac's attention focused on her. There was a subtle claiming in the way Isaac stood beside her, not touching but definitely present. "I would like that very much," Deanna replied, gratified by the flash of confusion that crossed Charlotte's perfect features. "Wonderful. I'll finish up my business here and meet you outside." Isaac tipped his hat to the ladies, then moved to speak with Mr. Harrington about an order. Charlotte's gaze flicked between Deanna and Isaac, her smile tightening slightly. "Well, it seems you've made quite an impression during your short time here, Miss Bennett." "Cottonwood has been very welcoming," Deanna replied mildly, refusing to be baited. "Indeed." Charlotte smoothed her already impeccable riding skirt. "I should continue my errands. Edward and I are attending the Harvest Festival tomorrow evening. Perhaps we'll see you there." After Charlotte departed, Martha released a soft snort. That woman has more nerve than a sore tooth. Parading back into town with her banker husband, as if everyone's forgotten how she treated Isaac. Deanna said nothing, but her thoughts were troubled as she completed her shopping. Would Isaac's feelings for Charlotte resurface upon seeing her again? The woman was undeniably beautiful, and they shared a history that Deanna couldn't hope to compete with in the short time she'd known him. Outside the store, Isaac waited with his wagon. He helped Deanna up to the seat, his hand lingering slightly longer than necessary on her waist. "Everything all right? You seem preoccupied." Deanna hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I met Charlotte Watson, or Fleming, rather." "Ah." Isaac's expression was unreadable as he climbed up beside her. "I wondered if your paths would cross while she's in town." "Martha told me a little about your history with her," Deanna ventured carefully. Isaac was quiet for a moment as he guided the horses down the main street. "Charlotte and I courted for nearly a year. I thought we had an understanding. Turned out she understood things differently." His tone was matter-of-fact without bitterness. "She wanted a life I couldn't give her: city comforts, society connections." "I'm sorry," Deanna said softly. Isaac glanced at her, his expression clearing. "Don't be. Charlotte did me a favor, though I couldn't see it at the time. We would have made each other miserable eventually." He smiled suddenly, the warmth reaching his eyes. "Some people belong in places like Denver or Philadelphia. Others find their home under Wyoming skies." The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning Deanna wasn't quite ready to examine. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about his preparations for the Harvest Festival. By the time they reached the livery, the shadow of Charlotte Watson Fleming had receded, replaced by the pleasant anticipation of tomorrow's celebration. The evening of the Harvest Festival arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool but not cold. With a sky so clear, the stars seemed close enough to touch. Deanna stood before the small mirror in her room, adjusting the drape of her blue silk dress. It was perhaps a year out of fashion by Philadelphia standards, but here in Cottonwood, it would likely be considered the height of elegance. A knock at the door preceded Martha's entrance. She carried a small wooden box which she placed on the bed. "You look lovely," Martha approved. "Blue suits you, brings out the green in your eyes." "Thank you," Deanna replied, smoothing a wrinkle from the skirt. "I'm a bit nervous, which is silly. It's only a local celebration." "It's not the festival making you nervous," Martha observed shrewdly. She opened the box and removed a delicate silver comb adorned with small pearls. "This was our mother's. I thought it might complement your dress." Diana's eyes widened. "Oh, Martha, I couldn't. Nonsense. It's been sitting in this box for years." "Mother would have loved seeing it worn by a beautiful young woman at a dance." Martha moved behind Deanna, gently securing the comb in her upswept hair. "There. Perfect." Deanna turned to examine the effect in the mirror. The comb caught the lamplight, adding a subtle elegance to her simple hairstyle. "It's beautiful, thank you." Martha squeezed her shoulders. "Isaac will be here soon. Try not to break his heart, won't you? It's only just mended." Before Deanna could respond to this startling statement, Martha had slipped from the room, leaving her to contemplate the unexpected responsibility of Isaac Thornton's heart. Isaac arrived precisely at 7, dressed in what was clearly his finest, a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his stubble to a clean line along his jaw. He looked, Deanna thought with a flutter in her stomach, remarkably handsome. His expression when she descended the stairs told her that he found her appearance equally pleasing. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "You look beautiful," he finally managed, extending a small nosegay of late wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. "These pale in comparison, but I thought you might like them." "They're perfect," Deanna replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. She pinned the flowers to her bodice, aware of Martha and the other boarders watching the exchange with varying degrees of discretion. "Shall we go?" The town hall had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor cleared for dancing. Long tables lined the walls, laden with enough food to feed 3 counties' roasted meats, pies of every description, cakes, breads, and preserves displayed with pride by the contributors. At one end of the hall, a small group of musicians tuned their instruments: fiddle, banjo, guitar, and piano. Deanna had never seen anything quite like it. In Philadelphia, social events were formal affairs with orchestras, elaborate decorations, and strict protocols. Here, neighbors greeted each other with genuine warmth, children darted between adults without reprimand, and laughter flowed as freely as the cider being served in tin cups. "What do you think?" Isaac asked, watching her take it all in. "It's wonderful," Deanna replied honestly. "So alive." Throughout the evening, Isaac introduced her to dozens of people whose names she couldn't hope to remember all at once. Everyone seemed curious about the new teacher bound for Elk Creek, and many offered advice or assistance with her upcoming move. The dancing began shortly after 8, with a lively reel that filled the floor with couples of all ages. Deanna, who had learned the more formal dances of Eastern society, watched in fascination as neighbors linked arms and spun in patterns that seemed simultaneously chaotic and perfectly coordinated. "Care to join them?" Isaac asked, extending his hand. Deanna hesitated. I'm not familiar with the steps. No steps to learn, really. Just follow my lead and enjoy the music. Before she could protest further, Deanna found herself in the midst of the dance, guided by Isaac's steady hands. After initial awkwardness, she began to catch the rhythm of the music and the pattern of movement. By the end of the song, she was laughing breathlessly, exhilarated by the unfamiliar freedom of the country dance. "You're a natural," Isaac told her as they moved to the sidelines for refreshment. "Hardly," Deanna replied, accepting the cup of cider he offered. "But it was tremendous fun." They were interrupted by Timothy Whitman, who approached with an older gentleman Diana hadn't met. "Miss Bennet, glad to see you enjoying our little celebration." Whitman turned to his companion. "Judge, this is the young lady I was telling you about, our new teacher for Elk Creek. Deanna Bennet, may I present Judge Abraham Hollister, circuit judge for the county." The judge, a dignified man with iron gray hair and keen eyes, bowed slightly. "A pleasure, Miss Bennet. Heard good things about your qualifications. We need more educated folks in these parts." "Thank you, Your Honor," Deanna replied. "I'm looking forward to beginning my duties on Monday." "Brave woman, taking on 28 youngsters of varying ages and abilities," the judge remarked with a twinkle in his eye. "I find one courtroom of adults challenging enough." The conversation continued pleasantly until the judge excused himself to speak with other constituents. As he departed, Deanna caught sight of Charlotte entering the hall on the arm of a thin, balding man with a waxed mustache and an expression of mild distaste as he surveyed the gathering. Isaac followed her gaze. "Edward Fleming," he supplied, "Charlotte's banker husband." Deanna studied the couple briefly. Charlotte was resplendent in a burgundy gown that must have been the latest fashion from Denver, her golden hair elaborately styled and adorned with jeweled pins. Despite her husband's obvious discomfort, Charlotte moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting compliments and renewing old acquaintances. "She's very beautiful," Deanna remarked, unable to keep a note of comparison from her voice. Isaac's hand settled gently on the small of her back, warm and reassuring through the silk of her dress. "Yes, she is," he agreed simply. "But beauty comes in many forms. I find I prefer substance to show these days." His gaze, when Deanna met it, held such clear admiration that she felt her cheeks warm. Before she could respond, the musicians struck up a waltz, the first formal dance of the evening. "May I have this dance?" Isaac asked, offering his hand. The waltz was familiar territory for Deanna, and she moved with confidence in Isaac's arms. He proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her smoothly across the floor with just the right amount of pressure at her waist. They moved in perfect harmony, as if they had danced together countless times before. "You dance beautifully," Deanna said, surprised by his skill. Isaac smiled. "My mother insisted both her children learn proper dancing, said it was a mark of civilization, even on the frontier." "She was right," Deanna replied, suddenly conscious of how closely they were moving, of the warmth of his hand at her waist, of the admiring glances they were receiving from onlookers. As they turned, Deanna caught Charlotte watching them, her perfect features arranged in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something possessive stirred in Diana's chest, a fierce gladness that it was she, not Charlotte, in Isaac's arms tonight. The evening progressed in a blur of dancing, conversation, and laughter. Deanna found herself swept up in the genuine warmth of the community, forgetting her earlier reservations about frontier society. These people might lack Philadelphia's polish, but they possessed a sincerity and zest for life that was deeply appealing. During a break in the dancing, Isaac led Deanna outside to the porch of the town hall, where several couples and small groups had gathered to enjoy the cool night air. The moon had risen, casting silver light over Cottonwood's main street and the rolling landscape beyond. "Needed a moment away from the crowd," Isaac explained, guiding her to a quieter corner of the porch. "Having a good time." "Wonderful," Deanna replied truthfully. "I've never experienced anything quite like it." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the music drifting through the open doors and watching the stars overhead. Deanna was acutely aware of Isaac beside her, of the strange comfort she felt in his presence despite knowing him such a short time. "Diana," Isaac began, his voice low and serious, "I know you're leaving for Elk Creek on Monday, and I respect your commitment to teaching there. But I want you to know that 10 miles isn't so far in Wyoming terms. I'd like to call on you if you're amenable." Diana's heart quickened at the formal phrasing that carried such significant meaning. "Call on me, court you properly," Isaac clarified, turning to face her fully. The moonlight caught the planes of his face, highlighting the earnest expression in his blue eyes. "I know we've known each other barely a week, but I feel there's something between us worth exploring, something special." Deanna should have been shocked by the swiftness of this declaration. In Philadelphia, courtships proceeded at a glacial pace, with months of formal calls and chaperoned outings before intentions were declared. But somehow, here under the vast Wyoming sky, Isaac's straightforward approach seemed exactly right. "I feel it too," she admitted softly. "Though it seems impossible to have developed such feelings so quickly." Isaac's smile was gentle. "Time measures differently out here. Days can seem like weeks when they're filled with meaning." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I'm not asking for promises, Deanna. Just a chance to see where this might lead." Deanna looked up at this man who had quite literally changed the course of her life when he found her crying on those cold station steps. In his eyes she saw honesty, kindness, and something more, a spark that kindled an answering warmth within her own heart. "I would like that very much," she replied, her voice steady despite the fluttering of her pulse. Isaac's smile deepened, and for a moment Deanna thought he might kiss her. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles in a gesture both respectful and filled with promise. "Then I'll ride out to Elk Creek next Sunday," he said, "after you've had a chance to settle in." The moment was interrupted by the hall door opening and voices spilling out onto the porch. Charlotte emerged on her husband's arm, her practiced laugh cutting through the night air. "Isaac, there you are," she called, steering her reluctant-looking husband toward them. "Edward and I were just saying we haven't had a chance to catch up properly." Isaac straightened, his hand still holding Deanna's. "Charlotte, Edward, enjoying the festival?" Edward Fleming's thin smile suggested he was enduring rather than enjoying the rural celebration. "Charming local color," he remarked with the faintest hint of condescension. "Though nothing like the gatherings in Denver, of course." "Of course," Isaac agreed mildly. "Deanna, I don't believe you've met Edward Fleming. Edward, this is Miss Deanna Bennett, the new teacher for Elk Creek." Edward barely glanced at Deanna, offering a cursory nod. "Teacher, a noble profession for a spinster." Deanna bristled at the casual insult, but before she could respond, Isaac spoke, his tone cooling noticeably. "Miss Bennett is a graduate of the Philadelphia Women's Normal School, one of the finest teachers' colleges in the country. Elk Creek is fortunate to have secured someone of her caliber." Charlotte's gaze flicked to their joined hands, her smile tightening slightly. "How wonderful that you've found someone who shares your rustic appreciation of Wyoming, Isaac. I always said you needed a woman who understood your attachment to this place." The barbed comment hung in the air, its intended sting obvious. Deanna felt Isaac tense beside her, and she squeezed his hand gently in support. I'm still discovering Wyoming's charms, Deanna replied smoothly, but I find I'm increasingly drawn to its honesty. There's something refreshing about a place where people say what they mean and mean what they say. Isaac's quick glance held surprised approval at her deft handling of Charlotte's passive aggression. Well, Charlotte said after a brief, awkward silence, we should circulate. So many old friends to greet. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. As the couple moved away, Deanna released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I apologize if I spoke out of turn. Isaac chuckled softly. On the contrary, I don't think I've ever seen Charlotte so neatly put in her place. His expression sobered. Thank you for defending Wyoming, and me. I meant what I said, Deanna replied. There's an authenticity here that I've come to value very quickly. Inside, the music had shifted to another waltz. Isaac gestured toward the open doors. Shall we return to the dancing? As they rejoined the celebration, Diana felt a curious sense of belonging she hadn't expected to find in this frontier town. Surrounded by the warmth of the community, her hand in Isaac's as they moved across the floor, she realized that the path her life had taken, though utterly different from what she had planned, might be leading her exactly where she needed to be. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, with the first hint of frost silvering the boardwalk outside Martha's boarding house. Deanna stood on the porch beside her trunk and valise, watching as Isaac secured the last of her belongings in the wagon that would take her to Elk Creek. The goodbye to Martha and the other boarders had been surprisingly emotional. In just over a week, these people had become important to her, their kindness a foundation upon which she had rebuilt her shattered plans. That's the last of it, Isaac announced, jumping down from the wagon. Ready to become Elk Creek's new schoolmarm, Deanna smiled at the term, which would have offended her a week ago but now seemed almost affectionate. As ready as I'll ever be. Martha emerged from the house carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Provisions for the journey, she explained, handing it to Isaac, and a few extras for Diana's first days in the schoolhouse. You didn't have to do that, Deanna protested, though she was touched by the thoughtfulness. Nonsense. Can't have our teacher going hungry. Martha embraced Deanna warmly. You'll do wonderfully, dear. And remember, you always have a place here if you need it. Thank you for everything, Deanna replied, blinking back unexpected tears. I'll write often. With final goodbyes exchanged, Isaac helped Deanna into the wagon and they set off toward Elk Creek. The journey seemed different this time, not an exploration of the unknown, but a movement toward something new yet increasingly familiar. Nervous? Isaac asked as they left Cottonwood behind. A little, Deanna admitted, but excited too. I've been thinking about the curriculum, how to manage the different age groups together. Isaac smiled. You'll be wonderful. Those children are lucky to have you. They traveled companionably, the conversation flowing easily between them. Deanna found herself watching the landscape with new eyes, noticing details she had missed on their previous journey, the way the light played on distant ridges, the graceful movement of a hawk circling overhead, the vibrant colors of turning leaves along the creek. By midday, they had reached Elk Creek, where Diana was greeted with enthusiasm by the Whitmans and several other families eager to welcome their new teacher. Children peeked shyly from behind their mothers' skirts, assessing the woman who would soon be guiding their education. Isaac helped carry her trunk and belongings into the small apartment behind the schoolhouse, setting everything in place with care. The room already looked more welcoming than Deanna remembered. Someone had added curtains to the windows, a colorful quilt to the bed, and a small vase of late autumn flowers on the table. Margaret's work, Isaac said, noting her surprise. The women of Elk Creek take care of their own. The statement warmed Deanna, this evidence that she was already being embraced by the community. After a meal with the Whitmans and several other families, during which the final details of school opening were discussed, it was time for Isaac to depart if he wanted to reach Cottonwood before dark. They stood beside his wagon, suddenly awkward after the easy companionship of the journey. "Well," Isaac said, replacing his hat, "you're all settled then." "Yes," Deanna agreed. "Thank you for everything, Isaac. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't found me on those station steps." "I'm glad I did," he replied simply. "Remember, I'll be out on Sunday, and if you need anything before then, just send word with the mail carrier. He passes through Cottonwood on Wednesdays and Fridays." Deanna nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. The past week had been so full of his presence that his absence would leave a noticeable void. Isaac seemed equally hesitant to depart. He removed his hat again, turning it in his hands. "Deanna, He paused, then continued with characteristic directness. "May I kiss you goodbye?" The question, so plainly asked, sent a thrill through Deanna that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with the man standing before her. In Philadelphia, such a request would have been scandalous from someone she'd known so briefly. Here, with the Wyoming sun warming her face and her heart racing beneath her sensible traveling dress, it seemed the most natural thing in the world. "Yes," she whispered. Isaac stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek while the other settled at her waist. His eyes, blue as the Wyoming sky, held hers for a moment before he leaned in to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and restrained, mindful of their public setting yet unmistakably heartfelt. It was brief, too brief, but as Isaac drew back, Deanna knew with sudden clarity that this man had already claimed a piece of her heart she hadn't intended to give so soon. "Sunday," he promised, his voice slightly roughened. "Sunday," she echoed. With a final smile, Isaac climbed into his wagon and set off toward Cottonwood, turning once to wave before the trail curved away from the settlement. Deanna watched until he was out of sight, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. Behind her, the schoolhouse bell chimed in the afternoon breeze, as if welcoming her to her new home. With a deep breath and a sense of purpose, Deanna turned toward the building that would be the center of her world for the coming months. She had arrived in Wyoming seeking one future, and found another entirely one that promised challenges and joys she had never anticipated. As she walked toward the schoolhouse, Deanna thought of Isaac's words on that first night, when he'd found her crying on the cold station steps. "You're already home," he had said, standing now in the doorway of her schoolhouse, with the vast Wyoming landscape spread before her, and the memory of Isaac's kiss still warming her lips. Diana Bennett realized he might have been right all along.